How does an artist remain relevant for decades at a time? Let's drop the needle on one of the greatest comebacks in music history. Hey music junkies, Professor of Rock here with your latest pop fix. As you know, every week we go in-depth on the greatest songs in pop history with the writers and the artists who created them. So the greatest stories ever told in pop culture history, whether it's in sports or movies, technology, music, they always have that amazing comeback story. In sports, no one can forget George Foreman's great rebound to become the heavyweight champion of the world at 45. Or in movies, when Marlon Brando shook off some box office studs and he hit back with that incredible performance in The Godfather. And of course, in tech, Steve Jobs, after being fired from his own company, returns decades later, rising from the ashes, and creates the iPod and the iPhone, amongst other things. In music, there have been 3 comeback stories that are bigger than the rest. Frank Sinatra, Elvis Presley, and Neil Sedaka. Now, Frank Sinatra lost his deal with Columbia. For a couple of years, he was in shambles. His career was in shambles. He couldn't get a very good movie. In fact, in music, he had to sing a song with a bunch of dogs singing in the background, barking. And it was pretty bad. And of course, he got the part in From Here to Eternity. He won the Oscar, he got his deal with Capitol Records, and the rest is history. Elvis had a great comeback because the Beatles came and they took over, and for a couple of years it kind of made Elvis, with all the movies that he was making, a little bit square, if you can even imagine that. I don't think he was ever square, but I guess people thought it at the time. And then he had the big 68 comeback special, and then a #1 hit in 1969 with Suspicious Minds, and he was back on top as well. Those are great stories, but I'm actually going to argue that Neil Sedaka has the greatest comeback story of them all. Here's why. He toiled for like 10 years. He was one of the biggest artists of the 1950s. The only person that sold more records than Neil Sedaka at that time was Elvis. He had Breaking Up Is Hard to Do, and he had Calendar Girl, and he was killing it. And he was writing for the Brill Building and helping to define those songs. He was on top of the world, and then the Beatles come to America, and it's over. Neil Sedaka could not buy a hit. He couldn't, nothing was going right for the guy. He had to actually move to the UK to do concerts. There was a time that he actually had to follow a stripper, and there were 20 people at his gigs. Pretty much throughout the 60s and really early 70s, 10 years, he didn't have a hit. He wasn't on the charts. And his wife stuck by him the whole time. He has this amazing comeback story. I mean, there were all of these musical trends that came out, and some weren't even trends. I mean, Beatlemania came and wiped everybody off the face of the earth. And then there was psychedelia, and there was folk music, and all of these different things that happened that Neil couldn't find his place. He didn't know if he fit anymore, but he kept going. Because of this, his remarkable perseverance and his commitment, his passion and his tenacity, and his immense faith in his own music, he outlived all of the trends that came out in the 60s and early 70s. His comeback in the 70s, it would take his career to a whole new level. He gifted the world songs that nobody could ignore, regardless of their musical taste. There's no other artist could name their album The Hungry Years and be taken seriously except for Neil, because of the battle that he fought to push his way back up the charts. He had a body of work that took his persona from icon of the early times to a legend, a songwriting legend. And, if you think about it, the song that went to #1, the feel-good, pure and unadulterated joy that fueled the sing-along standard Laughter in the Rain, which actually we feature this week at ProfessorofRock.com. Neil and I walk through that entire song and talk about it.
Ooh, I hear laughter in the rain, walking hand in hand with the one I love.
Laughter in the Rain has so much joy in it. I mean, it's a song that comes on the radio that it's like when Chris Farley and David Spade in Tommy Boy, when they're sitting there driving along and the Carpenters come on the radio and they're both kind of saying, hey, you can turn it if you want. Well, I don't want to turn it, and all that. They can't turn it because their soul is like languishing because they want to sing this song to the top of their lungs. And that's what Laughter in the Rain is. It's one of those songs that when it's on the radio, you're just like, oh, I hear laughter in the rain. Even right now, I can't help but just sing it. Your soul's exploding because it's just such a great feel-good song. You don't really want to admit it because you're not sure, but you know in your heart that it's true. There's also the heart-wrenching, soul-laid-bare melancholy of Solitaire.
He's playing solitaire.
Nobody else could have sung that except for Neil at that moment. There's actually a time, I've read his biography, where he said that he sang that song and he started to well up. He couldn't get through the song because at that moment, that's exactly how he was feeling. You can't plan those kinds of things in pop music. That's When the Music Takes Me. That's a great song as well.
That's when the music takes me to a brighter day.
And then, of course, there were other great songs at that time that he released, like Bad Blood.
Bad blood is taking you for a ride.
Elton John is the one that actually helped bring Neil's career back. Elton John's one of the biggest artists, not only of the 70s, but of all time. And I'm sure that when he had this comeback happen with Neil, he was probably thinking, man, this guy's competing with me now. Because, you go back and look at the 70s, and Neil Sedaka, there was a run there where every song he was releasing was going was a hit. His 70s output was amazing. When Tony Tennille of the Captain Tennille randomly sang the line, Sedaka's back at the end of the #1 hit, Love Will Keep Us Together, no truer words were ever spoken. It put the finishing touches on one of the greatest comebacks in entertainment history, and it was a catalog of songs that has impacted the last 7 decades. So it's Neil's birthday this week. In honor of that, we not only want to wish him the greatest birthday ever, but we also want to celebrate his gift with a special mini documentary, like I said, of his #1 hit, Laughter in the Rain, at professorofrock.com. Happy birthday, Neil Sedaka. We love you. Thank you so much for your songwriting gift and the songs you've gifted to the world. That's all for now. Remember, professorofrock.com, going in-depth on the greatest songs of the rock era every single week. Subscribe below for updates and help us keep the music alive. Send a comment. Go to the comment section below. Wish Neil a happy birthday. And also tell us, what do you think is the greatest comeback in music history and why? Until next week, I'm the Professor of Rock. Thanks.